What is up? Welcome into this Wednesday edition of Pushing the Pile, brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. It's Deep Dive Wednesday. We're going to get into some real in the weeds topics here about the game of football a little bit later. But in the first off the ball segment, Davante Adams officially requesting a trade from the Las Vegas Raiders. Not too surprising given how everything's gone down there over the course of his tenure in Las Vegas, but wild that it's happening at this point in time.
Correct.
4 weeks into the season. What are some landing spots
Man,
that we think?
There's a few landing spots in my mind. I think about Aaron Rodgers initially, and then I think about what would happen if he were to go there. He left Green Bay, went somewhere where he had a buddy, which was the Vegas Raiders.
Correct.
Next thing you know, Derek Carr is out the door in Vegas, and he's stuck with
They didn't even finish the whole season.
Stuck with a strange combination of Gardner Minshew and AOC. Yeah. I just think going back into that Jet situation would be bad business for him because it would end up being the same thing that he just did pretty much. Go to a team that needs another receiver with a quarterback that you feel like but in this situation, Aaron Rodgers is 40. How long is he going to be there? Is Saleh going to be there next year? What does the OC situation look like? You could be looking at the same situation you were last time around for Davante. So I think about maybe follow Derek Carr again. New Orleans. New Orleans would be cool. Maybe they could have some 3 receiver sets. And then I think about
they're always cap strapped.
The obvious in the division, Kansas City, and with all the stars on their roster that would absolutely restructure their deal to allow a superstar in there to give them a better chance to get into three-peat. I think it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I know some people brought up Kansas City, especially with the injury to Rashid Rice. Which it's weird. Do we actually know what is going on with his knee?
It's a non-ACL tear. We will have more information.
That's what I'm saying. Because nobody knows definitively, if he's going to be done.
Best case scenario, they're saying 4 to 6 weeks. It could be a bone bruise. Worst case scenario, it could be something like what I had with a tibial plateau fracture. They're saying it's not an ACL. We're going to have more information throughout the week. I'm going to put my feelers out to the Kansas City training room today, see if I can steal any information.
I love that.
Probably not, though.
I just don't see the Raiders trading within a division. Would you want to send Davante to a team that has already been beating your head in for the last
Davante's got soft tissue issues right now. So if he's not helping your team and you can go get 2 guys.
I'm still not going to help the Kansas City Chiefs. We saw the Bills already make that mistake with Xavier Worthy and going back further with Patrick Mahomes. Yep. I don't think the Raiders are going to do that. The Jets obviously make a lot of sense because him and Aaron Rodgers. And I get what you're saying, right? He tried this before going back to an old friend. But let's just look at it from a whole Davante Adams career point of view. When he's been the most productive has been with Rodgers, right? So, I think it makes sense from that standpoint. The only thing is, when you look at the receiving core, does that leave Mike Williams not playing as much? Does that leave Allen Lazard, who Aaron Rodgers trusts a lot, not playing? I mean, how would that mess with the locker room? To me, the one that's probably the funnest and makes the most sense, the Washington Commanders.
Yeah, that'd be crazy.
Sending him there with Terry McLaurin, with Jaden Daniels, the way he's been able to progress throughout these 4 games. We talked about this, Mike, earlier this year when we did a deep dive into Jaden Daniels and how well he was playing. Some of the things that worried you in the beginning was when he took off to buy time, he would just run. He wouldn't look down the field and throw the ball. Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers were one of the best combinations when Rodgers got outside the pocket. Yeah. So just imagine – now you got scary Terry McLaurin, but now you got Davante Adams when you break the pocket. That's a deadly combination. And I think when you look at the Commanders, they're a year ahead of where everybody thought they would be, even including me. I thought they were a team that would probably muddle around 9 and 8 and maybe sneak in as a 7 seed. Now we're talking about this team potentially winning the NFC East and maybe even being a 1, 2, or 3 seed. So why not add a guy like Davante Adams? I believe after this year doesn't have any more guarantees, so there'll probably be a restructure there. Now you're talking about Jaden Daniels at least having scary Terry McLaurin and Davante for the next 2 to 3 years. I think it just makes too much sense.
A fun one would be maybe Pittsburgh. What do you guys think about Justin Fields adding another target?
They don't pass enough for Davante.
That's the thing. It makes sense.
You would pass a lot more if you got Davante Adams and George Pickens. You got to pick your poison.
I don't think Arthur Smith is built like that with his offense, though.
It would just be fun.
Yeah, it would be.
I will say I love the Commander shout out because those are the type of moves you can make when you have the rookie quarterback contract. Correct. Right? They have the second most cap space right now in 2025. They have the money to play with, and for as much as Davante is not prime Davante, you're not going to find where they're going to be drafting, especially in the weak wide receiver class that's coming up. And and in the offseason free agency class where maybe T. Higgins is available, but what you're going to have to pay T. Higgins is going to be kind of insane. Training for a guy like Davante, the cap hit's not as big because the Raiders are going to eat a bunch of it. They've already done that with signing bonus. So it might make sense. I think that seemed like who does it make the most sense for? I think the Commanders are that. The Jets also make a ton of sense just because you've pushed your chips this far. Why not push them just a little bit farther, right? Like, why not give you just that extra edge? Because we even just discussed it on the show. The way the offense is set up right now, they need a second guy to get open. Like, as much as Mike Williams can make plays, he's not a guy that gets open on his own. Allen Lazard doesn't get open on his own.
Garrett Wilson's not like a surefire, elite, top-level receiver.
And that as well. Like, where Garrett Wilson, we've seen it in games show up where he's been going to him on third downs, fourth downs, and he's not quite as open as he wants to be, but that's your best guy. You got to go to him. Yeah. If you have a Davante Adams, I don't think that's going to be necessary.
There was a ball in particular last week that he threw to Garrett Wilson, and Garrett Wilson didn't even snap his head around to it, right?
So that's the issue right now.
That's
with
what
Garrett
Davante
Wilson
would be looking.
That's what I'm talking about. So when you talk about being on the same page right now, I think Aaron has the most trust in Allen Lazard, rightfully so. He's been with him the longest. And in regards to, we talked about this earlier in the last week, in regards to receivers being on the same page with the quarterback, especially with the pressures that these defensive coordinators are sending. Like, you have to know where the void.
You got to see what I see, man.
That's the thing. And I literally stated this on Monday on Spotlight. I was like, enough of this. Garrett Wilson needs to be on the same page with Aaron Rodgers. No, he needs to get on Aaron Rodgers' page.
Yeah.
Because at this point, it's just ridiculous. Like, for them to have done what they did during training camp, where it just seems like they were so in sync, to the first 4 weeks, they seem like they're on different planets. Makes no sense at all, especially 4 weeks into the season. So obviously Aaron Rodgers has so much freedom at the line of scrimmage on run plays. He could throw out the bubble screen. He could throw the smoke route if the corner is off. And then when there's pressure, you have to know to snap your head around because he's getting you the ball. And there's been instances where Tyler Conklin and Garrett Wilson are on the same page. The crazy thing is Mike Williams seems to be on more of a page with Aaron Rodgers, and he missed all of training camp. So that baffles me. So, like, on some of those back shoulder, fades, just knowing where you are from the line of scrimmage to give your quarterback enough room to throw the football, to know the landmarks that Aaron Rodgers is throwing the football. Mike Williams has done that really good this year, and he missed all the training camp. So at this point, it's ridiculous. If I'm Aaron Rodgers, I'm taking all these young guys in the meeting and say, all right, I tried to be politically correct. I tried to be nice. Enough of this.
Yep.
This is where you need to be in this look, and it's not up for discussion.
It sounds to me like when Peyton Manning went to the Broncos, and I had Adam Gase in Chicago, and he would always refer to 18 and the way that he did things.
Yeah.
The methods in which he would get guys to be on the same page with him. There was no prisoners. There was no Mr. Nice Guy. There was only one way. It was 18's way. And the next thing you know, you're winning the Super Bowl with a guy wearing a scuba suit. So we could be having that happen in New York if they get a guy like Davante or if they get on the same page.
And you must have been sitting on that take all week because we were talking about Davante Adams trade and Leger had to go all in.
Oh, man, I was ready
right now.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. The only thing is, again, what does that mean for the receiving core that's there? Is somebody potentially up for trade? Do you try to trade at Lazard, which is probably not going to happen because he's one of Aaron Rodgers' best friends?
Do you get rid of Wilson?
I think
no, they're not getting rid of Wilson. Does Mike Williams become available at the trade deadline if they make the trade earlier with Davante and we see it actually pay dividends?
I think you just say 4 wide receivers is good. And
somebody's just not going to get a target.
Like what we see in Green Bay, 4 wide receivers, you can make it work.
Yeah.
Like that's a good problem to have if you're the New York Jets at this point.
Yeah.
I'll just tie a bow in it by saying this. From the Las Vegas Raiders perspective, this is a bad start to the Tom Telesco era. Now, I like what he did this year's draft. I think they hit home runs with their first and second round pick, Brock Bowers, Jackson Powers-Johnson.
Right.
But you had to see this coming. You had to see it. This was everyone saw this coming. And if you made this trade before the draft, this offseason, whenever, the price tag was going to be higher than the price tag you're going to get right now in return for him. So from their perspective, I just don't get what they were thinking, not making this move sooner.
And even taking it a step further, right? What this does for the locker room, right? Because you're 2-2 right now. You're still in the thick of this thing, and you're going to be trading your best offensive player away potentially. I think it's something to be said too. We made a comment about this last week, Mike, when AP comes out and say guys are making business decisions, and so will we. Yeah. And then this week you take it a step further when the media asked him about the injuries and Max Crosby and Davante Adams. He goes, Max is a day-to-day thing, and 17 doesn't even say his name. And you know what that means, Kyle. Yep. When a coach doesn't even say your name. Now, again, when you're on the field, that happens all the time. Hey, 17, but when you're in a press conference and somebody specifically specifically asks you about a player's name and you say his number and don't say his name, there's an issue there. So I think you can kind of read into AP's mind when he was talking to his team after that big win they just had last week. Like, he was like, guys, this was, we had a lot of distractions. This was major. Like, you could tell, like, he just seemed like he was almost defeated. And I've never seen AP like that. I think he's a guy that is going to be himself, right? He's not going to walk comments back.
Unapologetically.
100%. And I love him. Was one of the best teammates I ever had. But I think that comment kind of weighed on him because of the distraction it brought to the locker room. And now it's even bigger because Davante Adams has come out formally and asked for a trade.
And with the advent of social media, I now have brain rot, boomer brain. So when I go through my timeline and I see fake stories, I often believe them. One story that I've been led to believe is real is that Antonio Pierce liked an Instagram post essentially.
Oh my goodness.
That said that don't be surprised that Davante Adams has already played his last snap.
Crazy.
Harry with a dynamite overlay there. Thank you very much. Antonio Pierce in the red square. He liked it. So if you come into that locker room and you're not named Davante Adams today, are you like, hey, what the hell is coach doing?
This is supposed to be our leader on offense.
What the hell, bro?
And he out here liking, they always say don't be a distraction.
I'm definitely roasting him a little bit, like low key, light key, giving AP some help.
That's my guy, but he knows he can't do that.
But in stretch
even
lines,
if it was
like, coach, you've been on my Instagram page recently?
And now Instagram snitches on you.
Yes.
Right? Because if you guys follow each other, like your name comes up first if you like a photo. So it's just like you have to understand.
AP, get a burner. Talk to Kevin Durant. Get yourself a burner. He's legendary.
It's just like these are the distractions that can deter your team from having success. And that's always coach's first rule going in training camp. Like, don't be a distraction to the team.
No distractions.
But meanwhile, our head coach is coming out having comments like this.
What's he even doing?
He's
on Instagram. What's he doing?
Oh my God, that's my guy, AB. But AB knows he's got to walk some of those back. Like you can't be liking comments like that, and you can't be saying. Again,
it must have been a pocket like.
Yeah, it was in my pocket. I didn't realize it.
My son was playing with my phone.
Kid, yeah.
Classic. All right, we're gonna take a little break here, but after this, gonna get in some deep dives. We got a lot in terms of on field, what goes on in the offense versus defense versus these new blitz packages. All right, after this.
Baby, we are gonna start a fire.
From world-renowned clubs
simply devastating
to worldwide stars.
Wrexham have done it. This incredible ride continues.
The English Football League on CBS Sports Network and stream every match live on Paramount Plus.
All right, we are back. And as always, please like, follow, subscribe, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get them. Helps us out a lot. Really appreciate it if you do. And it's deep dive time. We're going to be talking about things we want to talk about that we've been thinking about all week long. And Lachey, we'll start off with you. What have you been?
So this is going to kind of be a tag team one. Me and Kyle have discussed this for a while, and we thought it would be really fun to bring this conversation up so the fans could hear it. And it's why offenses, more specifically offensive lines, have struggled with the double A gap mug. And when I say double A gap mug, I mean when you line a linebacker up in the A gap, either side of the center, right? And you essentially have like 5 down, even 6 down sometimes. So when you look at it, like I just think, Brian Flores has been really inventive in the way he's done things and simulated pressure. I want to say simulated pressure where you might be bringing somebody off the edge, but essentially still is only a 4-man rush, right?
So one guy drops and one guy comes.
Correct.
So at the end of the day, you net to the same number of rushers.
And I'll speak from a defensive standpoint. When we're doing this, it's all about trying to dictate the protection. Right? When you put 2 guys in the A gap, you want to make sure you know where the protection is going, because off of that, you can either have pass rush games with the linebackers or the defensive line, or what we talked about, one end drops and you bring that simulated pressure off the edge. But it's so hard for offensive lines because you don't know which side guys are coming from, right? That's why communication is so key. I actually just sent a clip to Kyle the other day. The Jets had an issue with this versus the Broncos, which, again, I didn't understand because if you watch what the Broncos did the week before versus Tampa Bay, they did it like every single play, and the Tampa Bay Bucks had no answer for it. So it's all about communicating. And Kyle made a good point a couple weeks ago when we brought this up. You have to stop guys from penetrating and picking offensive linemen, right? For a defensive line, we want to get guys on different levels, because if we get you on different levels, that's exactly what we want to do. So you say you have those 2 guys in the A gap, right? And the center says, we're sliding right, right? We're going to the right. Well, a lot of times that guy to the right of the center is there just to buy the center. He's not even rushing.
Now now he bails out of the rush.
Correct.
You waste your center in the slide.
Correct.
The guy from the left side comes, either picks your center or just has a free run to
100%.
the quarterback. And then it's a scramble to get back onto a level playing field as an offensive line. We call these looks double-A mug. Also, it can present as 3 across.
Yep.
Sometimes you may have a 2-eye, a 4-eye, and a defensive end. And now that's a big rush game. That's a load front. But in this situation, you're talking about double-A mug. And when I was in the league, it was the Minnesota Vikings with Eric Kendricks and Barr. That's what they did.
Yep.
They lined up with 2 guys over the center. And some weeks we would play them. We would say, okay, whoever we mic, that's who the center's going to.
Yep.
And you guys respond accordingly. So if it's Mike right, then the left side is man-to-man with the 3 technique in the defensive end. On the right side, if you get that slide, you know you have the center in your hip pocket. So you can shoot your shot a little bit. You can take an aggressive set on that 3 technique. But one thing you always have to do is be aware as a tackle and a guard that somebody is probably going to try to pick you.
Correct.
You need to get depth off the line of scrimmage, and great offensive line coaches always tell offensive linemen in these situations, do not get any width off of your inside leg. So you're gonna essentially get a little bit of depth, and you're not going to get any wider, because if you get wider, your hip becomes exposed
Correct.
for that internal rusher. That's when games happen. And not only that, you might get picked and that rusher still gets home. You won't be able to recover onto this guy. So for double-A mugs, mic point is really crucial. And I talked about sometimes we'll mic right and we'll go right. Well, these guys have gotten so good, to your point about, well, shit, when they mic me, you go and I'm dropping.
That was the whole thing, is they would know.
They told us what we were doing. So we would make false mics. If we mic to the right, we are going left. And as a young player, it was like, who do I trust? Can I even trust the center? And as you go and play and get more experience with these pressures and picking them up and trusting that your quarterback's going to get you on the right page, good things can happen. There's a number of ways to do it. You can gap protect, which means everybody gap down to the left, and there's usually a free runner on the right.
Yep.
Or everybody gap to the right, and there's a free runner on the left. In those situations, the quarterback, you've heard hot adjustments, sight adjustments.
Yep.
And for a quarterback, when you've got a free runner, most of the time you know it and you set it up to have that free runner so you can hit wherever that coverage element came from. There will be somebody open. So depending on whether you want to gap, zone, man, slide, whatever the hell you want to do in protection, there are answers. The key is trying to figure out the pattern and what the defense is trying to get done.
I think one of the interesting developments I've seen in terms of blitz packages is, and I don't have any insight into like actual playbooks and what they're told to do, but I see rushers adjust based off of slides post snap.
For
so
sure.
Like they're doing their stuff, what they're asked to do, and I see it a lot with the Minnesota Vikings, how they blitz their linebackers. If they get picked up, basically if a running back comes and they have him, they stop being a rusher and start just being a chaos agent and try to pick an offensive lineman. They stop trying to rush the passer one-on-one against a running back, as a blitzer, and start just trying to stunt. And there's like post-snap reads that they're making as a blitzer that aren't just, hey, on paper, you execute a TE stunt. Well, you're seeing a lot of teams say, oh, based off of, where the slide comes.
Naturals, right?
Yeah.
You are changing
rush. Yeah.
your rush.
Explain the difference between a predetermined TE or an ET and a natural.
So we come in, again, I think Kyle explained it perfectly, depending on where the center's pointing, right? If we've done our research, because teams have protections based off different things, right? It could be the formation strength, right? It could be where the Mike backer is. A lot of people are just split from the back. If the back's this side, the center is sliding away. So you've done your research. You kind of know where the center is pointing. And this is the chess game that Kyle was talking about, where a lot of teams will give dummy calls, right? Just to mess with the defensive lineman, right? So if we have a TE stunt, which we call a text, right? We usually try to get it away from the center slide, right?
So
now,
the DT going first. And
correct. The defensive tackle is penetrating through the B gap. Now, technically, he has contained, but we're taught to get to that hip of the offensive tackle and ricochet to the quarterback. You want to get to the depth of the quarterback's drop. If you get to the depth of the quarterback's drop, you technically can, we call it contain through the B gap, right? Through that B gap. And then the defensive end will take it up the field, right to where the D tackle picks the offensive tackle and wrap around, right? We want to get that away from the slide. But to Mike's point, and Kyle's point, sometimes the offensive line will trick you in regards to where they're going to slide it at. So sometimes, even on that backside, if you don't have the game, if the slide goes away, you can essentially run a natural game, is when you just feel the defensive tackle getting up, So essentially you're switching responsibilities. Yeah. So it's the same thing on the other side. You'll get up in that B gap, and once you get to the depth of the quarterback, the end will fill it. You don't need two guys rushing outside because now you've opened up a big A gap between the guard and center. That end will wrap around. But what I really love, what teams have done with this double A gap mug, is that they're getting the linebackers involved in some of these picks. Right, we saw it the other day.
The Bears did it. Yes. Edmonds and Edwards did it to perfection 2 weeks ago.
And we saw the Denver Broncos do it to perfection. The clip that I sent to Kyle, literally, they had two linebackers in the A gap, and this guy fake drop. We call that a coffee house.
Coffee house. Right? He coffee house.
He fake drop, and then they slanted the D tackle in the end inside. We call that a pirate slant. So the D tackle is going from over the guard into the center picking. The end is coming from over the tackle, picking the guard. And then the linebacker is wrapping around. We call that a pirate stunt. And the Jets messed it up because, like Kyle said, a lot of times you need to man block that if you're on the offensive line, right? So once that guy slants inside, the guard owns him, right? The tackle. Once the end slides inside, you own him. And then the back's in protection, he gets the wrapper. But what happened was the right tackle kind of panicked. And once he got beat across the face, instead of just staying there and letting the back sort it out, he slid down, right?
And then
so
they
now
don't get the looper.
Then they don't get the looper. So that's the chess game. And that's why it's so hard for offensive linemen to pick it up, because there's always a counterpunch to what you do, right? The offensive line decides to slide this way. All right, we're going to do the game over here. It's all about, like you said, building up that continuity and having that communication on offense. And then what we talked about earlier in the show, understanding the hots, right? So if there is a 5-man rush, there's a void somewhere on defense.
There's a free runner somewhere.
Correct. So there's going to be a void behind where that free runner is coming from. You have to be on the same page as the quarterback. That's why I always say, if you don't have answers for pressure in the NFL, it's going to be a long day for you. And that'll be something to watch this week with Brian Flores going against the Jets. They really struggled versus Denver last week. We'll see if they'll pick up some of those hots. Will Garrett Wilson and Tyler Conklin be on the same page with Rodgers? That'll be something to watch in that early game.
I think in that matchup, it's a really good point. And I'm not concerned about the left side of the line of scrimmage, the offensive line, because they are so experienced in terms of that left tackle and the things he's seen, the pressure packages he's seen. But when I think about that rookie over there, it's going to be Fashanu again, right?
Correct. Yeah, I think Morgan's still out.
think you're going to be looking at a lot of opportunities for that defense to try to run these games, taking advantage of the right side and getting the eyes of the right tackle in the wrong spot. Because to your point, when you're on the man side, what can't you get beat with? The inside move. But when you're on the zone side, you still have a little bit of that fear from being on the man side. Correct. And when you do get beat inside, you can't let your eyes go inside because there's always somebody else coming. To your point, if the initial guy pre-snap that's contained goes somewhere, they either have to replace him or there's somebody externally coming to fill in to his gap responsibility. Yep. There's so much that happens pre-snap. This is just a little bit of a look at it. I think you and me are going to do some social stuff where we actually get to show these people on film exactly what we're talking about. But, these defensive coordinators are getting creative. They're getting smart. They're figuring out what the offensive lines, the quarterbacks are trying to do. And this is the game within the game that people always talk about.
And to that point, right, it's a copycat league. We saw Green Bay mount a comeback in the second half, essentially doing what Brian Flores does to every other team. And Minnesota hadn't struggled all year long. I mean, Sam Darnold is probably the best quarterback right now currently against the blitz. But that simulated pressure that we talked about, Mike and Kyle, where it looks like 6 guys are coming, but essentially only 4 guys. Yeah. Kassan Nixon had a sack fumble literally based off the double A gap mug look. So I look for the Jets to do some of that too against the Minnesota Vikings because they had some struggles with that in the second half versus Green Bay.
I think the biggest thing, if you were to distill it down to why are they struggling so much against double A gap, it's that the defense can change their rules post-snap, the offensive line can't.
Yep. Correct.
The offensive 100%. Line is rigid. Once the call is made, they have to do X, Y, Z.
It's like
defense can change.
It's like a transition in basketball. Let's say you and I are on defense and we get a rebound, and all of a sudden it's you and me out the gate, and we're both running down the court. And let's say you're on the right side of the court. I'm not going to be on the right side of the court. I know that I'm needed on the left side of the court. It's like when you're playing my 2K My Player, you get a positive grade for going in the right lane and transition. That's how those natural stunts work. Yep. That's why things can change with fluidity on the defensive side of the ball. And in offense, we are in our call. We all have to be the same way, or we are all wrong.
All right. I like that one. That was a great conversation, I thought. All right, Kyle, what's yours? Deep dive.
That was it. We're getting into the double stuff.
Double deep dive.
I mean, later after you go, I'll go vet days, but I want to hear what you have.
My thing, because I was watching some prospects over the weekend, doing my top 5 prospects that dropped on CBSSports.com. Go check it out.
Ooh.
By position. How much skill development actually happens in an NFL locker room? And then the flip side of that is how much physical development do you think happens once you get into an NFL locker room? 22, 23 years old. Are you kind of peak physical condition when you enter the league, or is there
no?
It's like how much
27 is
25, 27. Like how much
some
development happens?
Some guys that they're developing physically until they're 30. Some guys are really lucky, but I will say I'll start with the skill development, and I'll say this: a lot of what we did in college. I went from a junior college to Oregon, and at junior college we were just trying to make sure everybody went to class and
pretty much right.
And we had a hell of a time playing the football games, but it wasn't as much attention to detail in terms of technique. And with skill, I think it couples with technique, because when somebody uses great technique, it looks to the untrained eye as very skillful, right? Especially at the offensive line position. You get a great coach, and there's no limit to the amount of technique that you can learn and how much better you can become as a football player. Now, obviously, physical development goes hand in hand with health. So how healthy were you coming into the league? Were you overcoming an injury out of your senior going into your rookie year? And if you were a guy that has good health, you could absolutely develop physically. I mean, that's why we have these off-season programs, and it's so geared towards strength, because during the season, what happens? Your muscle mass goes down.
It does.
You get banged up physically. So for these guys coming into the league, they're getting ready to play these 18-game seasons or 18-week seasons, sometimes playoffs, sometimes more. You have so much room to grow from skill and strength. I think it all depends on which strength coach you get, which O-line coach you get, or which D-line coach you get. I mean, but
so it is mainly like
until you're 30, I could say you're getting better.
Yeah.
And then very rapidly you hit that cliff.
I felt it at 30 myself, and I wasn't even playing in the league.
To me, right, I think what needs to be said, and Kyle, you can speak to this, your rookie year is your longest year, without a doubt, right? Because you look at it, depending on which program you're at, if you at one of the upper echelon programs, Alabama, Ohio State, and it's even going to be crazier now with the expansion of the college football playoffs. Like, you're playing all the way to January, right? Then you have all-star games. Then you had a combine.
Then you got 2 weeks off before OTAs.
If that, right? Some people literally after the draft go that next weekend and they have mini camp. So it's just like your body just goes through so much in that time span, right? And not only physically, mentally, you got to think about all the things you've been through, playing a whole season, not literally having a second to decompress. And then, like, you're in the league, and this is a profession now, which, again, in college essentially is a profession now because of the NIL. But, like, this is where you hear people talk about the rookie wall, right? And to your point, Mike, you talk about, like, do guys continue to develop? Like, if your mind isn't in the right space, it's hard for you to develop. Right, because there's so much going on in your mind in your rookie year. And that's why, a lot of people are so quick to give up on guys their rookie year. But I'm like, dude, their rookie year, you're just trying to stay above water, honestly. Like, now the special ones, they're able to push through that rookie wall and continue to develop and continue to play at a high level. But for most guys, they're literally just trying to just
figure out what works.
Yeah, figure out what works. Trying to figure out what it means to be a pro's pro. Because nobody's holding your hand in the NFL.
No.
Like, these coaches aren't checking it. Like, you're getting paid for this. Be here
Take care of your body, watch the film,
Correct.
Be on time.
Don't be a distraction to the team. Right? So it's just like you can continue to develop. Rookie year, again, it's just about learning how to be a pro, right? But this is why we always habits, exactly. We always talk about coaching matters. And I think that's lost in regards to a lot of players where they don't develop. Because I think Mike Thomas said it best. He's like, I run to coaching. A lot of guys run away from coaching because he's like, I hate seeing evals where it says, he doesn't use his hands well, or, his pad level is too high. That's coaching.
Yeah.
That's like, you can change that. Like, now, again, if a guy has a stiff ankle and he can't bend the edge, like, that's one thing. Like, that's a hindrance he can't potentially change in the future. But when it comes to developing and using your hands and technique that we talked about in fundamentals, that's coaching. I think there's been a lost art when it comes to that, as far as coaching is willing to put into work, because they're scared to run away from coaching. It's like so many guys want somebody tailor-made coming in ready already. No, your job as a coach is to develop and get this guy.
That's such a rarity.
Yeah, but I don't think people understand that. That's why I'm glad we're having this conversation. Like, a lot of guys come in the league and people call them busts. No, they were just put in the wrong system and the coach didn't coach them up.
So how much off season, whether it's, when your actually team program is dedicated to skill development, and how much is dedicated to, hey, get up to speed in our scheme and whatnot?
I think a good portion of it. So
skills.
It's like you lift and stuff, but it's mainly just to get ready for the playbook, to get ready for training camp. So like the one thing I will say the NFL does a really good job on is rookie class. Like, so for people who don't understand what that is, during the offseason, there's like 90 plus guys in the building, and the veterans will actually meet with the coaches, with the rookies in that class. But then the rookies have to come back later.
Rookies stay in the meeting room when we leave.
Yeah, and stay with the coaches and then go out on the field and do walkthroughs and stuff. So I will say they've done a really good job in regards to developing and
that bridge.
in regards to learning what the playbook and getting up to speed with that. But the thing I think that also can hurt is because there is so many guys, the one-on-one facet of developing kind of gets hurt.
Yeah, there's 20 D linemen in
exactly.
your
so it's not like a coach
training.
can individually talk to one guy at one time and be like, well, I see you doing this. This is what I need you to work on. So they'll bring the point up in the meeting room, but when you're out on the field, it's hard to get that one. That's why there's so many specialized coaches in the offseason that you see guys go with pass rush guys. You see guys go to Dallas and go to these O-line camps and everything.
Shout out to Big Duke.
Yeah, Big Duke does an amazing job just because I need to work on my skill. The crazy thing is when I first retired, Kyle, I did D-line specific work. Right, because I saw that there was a void for it, and guys loved it because a lot of times, these trainers, they work on, your speed and agility and all that. But at the end of the day, you're getting paid to play football. Yeah. Like, I need to work on my craft. Like, that's how I get better. And you're seeing an influx of so many coaches doing that now because there's a major need in regards to developing. If you don't get that development in regards to your specific coach, because there's so many D linemen when you're in training camp and OTAs, you can get that work in the offseason with a specialized coach.
I think about when I was in the league, who I looked up to around the league in terms of their technique, their work ethic, their toughness. And it's so funny how important coaching is because that list seems to always end up just being Notre Dame guys that Harry Hiestand coached. And when I think about guys coming into the National Football League, I question some of the guys that they were coached by in college.
Man, my God.
To your point, the things you've learned shows up on tape 100%. And the things that you haven't learned show up even louder on tape. And when I watched Zach Martin come into the league, I watched a guy who had clearly taken his technique just as seriously as his strength training. All these guys are jacked. All these guys can squat a house and bench press 500 pounds. But at the end of the day, where are your hands going to be when Leger comes off the ball on 3rd and 1? Are you going to have low pad level? Are you going to get that second step in the ground and have some oomph behind your strike? Or are you going to be a guy that catches? I see a lot of these O-linemen catch nowadays. There are still guys that teach it the right way, and there are still players that are doing it the right way. I just wish that more guys would take note of the fact that technique is important. Practice is important.
100%.
And that's one thing I didn't realize when I was playing. I thought I always didn't need to practice, even if I didn't feel great. That's probably the most important time to practice is when you don't feel great. Yeah. Because you need to develop those habits even in times of trials and tribulations.
100%. I'm so glad you brought that up because you got to learn what to do when you're not feeling good, when you are beat up. Like, because to your point,
because you're always beat up.
Yeah, when you're fatigued, right? What you're taught or what your muscle memory, that's what's going to kick in. And they always say that as coaches, like when you're fatigued, you're going to go back to what you do in practice. Right? That's why practice is so important. I have seen guys that were freakishly athletic and didn't need practice, quote unquote. But again, to me, I always felt better going into games if I know I did the reps in practice.
Calloused.
Exactly. You have to build and I think that's another reason why offensive linemen have struggled this year. And not even this year, the last couple of years, there isn't a callus that's been built up in training camp, like when me and you were in training camp. Like my first 3 years, and again, I don't think we need two-a-days, but I think guys do need to hit more because there's a certain callus you have to build up on offensive line. And then the only way to get better, talking about what we were talking about earlier in regards to protection and the double A-gap mug, it's for you to get the reps with the guys that you're going to be out there with. Yep. Like if you're not out there with those guys and you don't have that communication during practice, it's going to be hard for you to do it in game time because you're going to be on different wavelengths. And we talked about it. You said when you're on the man side, you got to get depth. Both of you guys got to be in sync because if you're on different levels, we love that as a defensive line. This right here, these ribs, we're taking that for a run. Like, and we're penetrating and getting to the quarterback. So practice is important, right? You being out there with your teammates and even on D-line, right? When we talk about those pass rush games, it's timing. You have to know how each guy is rushing. You have to rush in unison. The same thing for offensive line.
And I think it rolls well into what I wanted to talk about with my third topic. Probably not as deep of a dive as the first two we just did, but I wanted to ask you some questions about vet days because now's the time of the year. Just after this is the
after a quarter,
end of the first quarter of the season. Guys who are on your roster that are legitimate stars, really good players, will start to want less practice. And one thing you'll hear about are vet days. And you may have guys show up on the injury report as limited for no reason. And then you have some guys that for somehow they don't end up on the injury report and they don't practice. There's guys who are just limited. What are your thoughts on veteran days? I know that when I played, I was a strong supporter of veteran days. And now, of course, like, a total boomer, I'm like, everybody should practice all the time. What are your thoughts on vet days? Do they have benefits? And if there are risks,
correct.
Talk me through those.
I'm a big supporter of it within reason. I think you have to put that in there, right? Because there are scenarios where we see guys like, and this is not me calling the guy out. I heard in Dallas, like Tyron Smith didn't practice at all, maybe a little bit on Friday. And then he has like a medical history. So you do want to be smart with guys like that. I remember, I think vividly, I didn't get my first vet day until year 8. Wow. Which is crazy, right? To think about. And it happened in training camp. Rex Ryan, my guy, was like, you know what, dudes? Every Thursday you're off in training camp. So it was one day a week. He was like, you're off. I think it was me and Lorenzo Alexander. We were on the same.
That's amazing.
Oh, it was great. So he was like my buddy. Like we would always just chill on Thursday practices. It's my guy. So we knew every Thursday, hey, we knew throughout the week, hey, we got to go hard because we know after Wednesday's practice, especially because and Rex looked out double for us because usually Friday would be off. So you're talking about getting 2 days off. Now, again, you got to be smart. You can't.
But with that comes the expectations.
You got to go out and ball.
You have to ball.
You got to go out there and ball. 100%.
Or your ass is going to be out there and practice.
As coach, you know which guys you can do that to.
Yes.
Right. You've been around guys like Rex. I had been with him for 3 years already.
And it takes time to learn that.
Correct. So he knew me and Zoe were consummate professionals. We were going to go out there and lay it on the line no matter what. And then during the season, I couldn't get on that program because we had Zoe and Kyle Williams. And you already know the roster gets cut in half essentially. Yeah. So what they did is they just took half of my reps away on Thursday and Friday, where I think Kyle had Wednesday off, Zoe had Thursday off, and then on Wednesday and Thursday they would split my reps in half because we just didn't have the bodies. So I wouldn't have a day off during the season, but I would only have to do half the practice on Wednesday and Thursday. So again, I think once you get to a certain year in your career and you know what it means to be a pro, how to get your body ready for Sunday, I think you do have to back down on some veterans to take some of that banging off of their body. Essentially, I would say around, like you said, after week 4, 5, or 6, that's when you start implementing that program.
The requests start coming across the coach's desk.
I don't think you do it the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season.
It's that leadership meeting that you do on Monday and Tuesday.
Hey, coach, it's 7, year 8 for me.
There's a leadership council on most of these teams, and it's probably 6 to 8 guys from different sides of the ball and special teams. And they meet with the head coach, and they're guys who usually have a pretty candid relationship with the head coach.
For sure.
And the conversations always right now are like, hey, what do you think about cutting Thursday down?
Exactly. Can we cut it down a little bit?
I'll say this as my final take on vet days. To your point, there are unique situations where guys should be given some time off. If they're producing on game day and if they're going out there, they're lifting on Tuesday with the team, they're running, they're on time, they do practice on Wednesday and they do Friday, give them a Thursday.
Yep.
But I'll say this, the position that I think it affects most is the offensive lineman. If an offensive lineman misses practice, then not only one guy is going to be practicing next to somebody new, usually 2 guys are practicing next to somebody new. If I'm the right guard and I'm out all practice all week, then the center has to learn how to do a double team front side and backside with the right guard. The right tackle has to figure out how the hell he's going to fit up on a double team. And then I pull that guy out on Saturday night and I come in on Sunday and it's different. And it's bad for them and it's bad for me because I didn't have reps. So there's the argument for practice being necessary. I think if you're a tight end or a receiver and you want to get less reps, that's understandable. You're not working hip to hip with another player. But if you're a tackle, a guard, if you're a defensive lineman, if you need to know how to rush or run games with the guy you're playing next to, I always hear Chris, Chris loves Michael Bennett, loved rushing next to Michael Bennett, but sometimes Michael would go rogue. And it would take Chris out of his ability to get the job done in terms of picks, in terms of games. And that's just how you D linemen are. You guys are just wild Cowboys. But I think vet days, they can be limited, but in certain situations, I understand it.
To your point, I know we got to go to break, Mike. Just explain, because I love these conversations because it could take you to somewhere else. Just explain, again, why it's so important to be on the same page as one unit. Because I always say the offensive line is a string, right? You have to be on the same, because I don't think people understand when it comes to different angles and your attack points, when one guy does it one way and another guy does it another way, how that can hurt the whole offense.
Well, I'd say the first 2 weeks you spend with a new group, you're going to get your feet stepped on 24 times in the first few periods. And that's just because I haven't figured out how you step. You haven't figured out how I step. I haven't figured out how you like to approach a double team, where your hands are. You get your hands crushed a lot by the guys on the backside of double teams, because they may throw their helmet in there in a certain spot and they have to learn, that's where he's got his hand. Like, I can't put my helmet there. Things as simple as that you don't see on TV that are definitely being discussed in the huddle after these plays. They are made more difficult by not practicing next to your buddy, particularly on the offensive line.
I'll say this about vet days. I think it's only become more prevalent throughout the NFL. I mean, like the injury science, load management, we've already seen it really impact the NBA. But I think with 17 games now, playoffs, and how like the healthiest team at the end of the year is usually like the one standing at the top. Anything these teams can do to stay healthy, I think they're going to start doing it, including things of that nature. All right, that's it for our deep dives. We're going to get to your mailbag questions here right after this.
It's a team almost too good to be true.
You guys ain't ready for us.
Kick your game day off right as the Tops team tackles all the biggest headlines around the league.
Who's got two thumbs and loves this next segment?
Sunday mornings on CBS Sports Network.
All right, you guys asked, we're going to answer. And as always, leave a 5-star review and Apple Podcast with your question, and we will answer it. And that's the very first one here from sad Steelers fan Matt. He asks, and he specifically says, my question is for Kyle. As a former player, would the fact that Justin Fields lit up the Steelers defense as a rookie in 2021 help him win favor in the locker room among the important vets, Cam Hayward, TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, etc.? I just asked because I have seen several times where the camera pans to him on the sidelines, and it seems like all the guys believe in Fields, whereas I can never remember one of the defensive guys mentioning Pickett, much less laughing it up on him with him on the sidelines. Love the pod.
Yeah, this is a great question. This is a really good question, in my opinion. And thank you for asking this. I think there's no question that if you're part of a defense that plays against a quarterback, particularly a young dual threat style quarterback, and he cooks you a little bit, you'd be like, man, we want him on our team. We definitely don't want to play him again. I remember playing against Khalil Mack early in my career, and he dominated our team. And then he came to our team, and I was like, hell yeah, brother.
Training camp.
I would say this. It really helps that Justin Fields is such a physical freak, because one quick way you earn respect in the NFL is the eyeball test. And when Justin 100%. Fields walks into the locker room, they're like, that's our you-know-what quarterback right there. Whether it's Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, you take a look at those two standing next to each other, and it's like, I want that guy.
They look different.
For sure. But yes, to answer your question, it does matter that he went and played against this defense, and guys like Cam Hayward and TJ Watt, they had to prepare for him and scheme for him, because they know that that's what every other defense in the NFL is going to have to do.
Yeah, and this is why I've been saying, like, even if Russell Wilson is healthy, and there seems like there's rumors he could potentially be back to 100% this week, this isn't a competition.
No.
This is Justin Fields' team. Like, the team has brought into everything he's done. And we know this, Kyle, winning cures all. Like, he went in there, took full advantage of that opportunity, and has these guys with only one loss on the season, right? And literally a drive away from being undefeated this year. Exactly. So when you look at it, yes, I would say 2021 helped, because to Kyle's point, as a defensive player, we're like, dang, man, if we had a guy like that on our team, like, we could go far, because we know what our defense can do, and he cooked us. But more specifically, it's what he's done since he's come into the locker room. Like, anytime, the defensive guys love the quarterback, you're in the right position.
He's on their podcast.
Yeah, you're in the right position as a team.
That leads to our next questions. What do you do if you're Steelers with Justin Fields, Russell Wilson situation? I think we're all in agreement.
You make sure Russell Wilson keeps his shoulder pads on
Correct.
and his headset on. And you make sure Justin Fields is bringing the play to the huddle.
All right, next question from Votto says, should the Bears trade Keenan Allen for an offensive line?
You know what? I did read somewhere that it could be Trey Smith from the Chiefs to the Bears for Keenan Allen.
Why would the Chiefs trade Trey Smith?
Well, if you're looking to get a receiver to ail your woes,
your interior three is so good.
But here's the deal: people don't realize
Trey Smith contract year.
Trey Smith,
he's in the contract year.
Trey Smith's my dog, and I'd love to see him play for the Bears.
If
he got to play right guard for the Bears, he'd be my new favorite player in the world.
Wow, that's an interesting trade.
It would be cool. Keenan Allen, he's been in and out of the lineup here for the Bears. They've been able to use a lot of guys offensively. It's not like if Keenan Allen goes out of that receiver room, they're in dire straits.
Yeah.
They've got Rome. Cole Kmet's had production.
Yep.
The running game was up last week. So who knows? I mean, it could be interesting.
That's an interesting.
Thanks a lot, Big Vato.
I will say this ship kind of sailed, I feel like.
Big Vato.
And there's more like the $23 million you used on him this offseason probably should have gone towards the offensive line. At this point,
I don't think they thought Rome would
be there. That's valid also. They had to make that decision.
And it makes a lot of sense because you knew that Keenan Allen was a one-year rental, right? Just to help with the development of your young quarterback.
He's a pacifier.
Selfishly, I wanted him to go 10 to the Jets. I was hoping the Bears.
Would have been nice.
I was hoping the Bears went offensive line.
I don't think the Bears are going to trade. I think that they're going to they're definitely going to reinvest into the draft and potentially some free agency this offseason. But they've got the pieces they want now, and there's no change in that.
All right, next question from Mickey Monday asks, what happened to Jeff Okudah? I remember Mike mentioning during pre-draft he was the best DB to come out since Jalen Ramsey. Why didn't it translate? What did Mike learn about evaluating him from not working out? I'll say this. He had one of the worst injury starts to his career of anyone I can remember. He had a grade 2 hamstring strain preseason, ended up missing first week of his rookie year, came back, and then that season, week 11, has a core injury that had to have surgery on both sides of his abdomen. So missed that offseason period, had a shoulder surgery that offseason as well, and then come into year 2 towards Achilles week 1. So
it's been tough.
Truly about as bad as you can get. And then when he came back from that Achilles, well, not everyone comes back 100%, and he never quite had the same juice he had. And at quarterback, as anything if you lose a step, oftentimes that is your game. And you've seen it with like Darrelle Revis. You see it with a lot of older corners where when it goes, it looks like they forgot how to play the position because, well, it's such a physically demanding position, especially when Okudah was a pure man corner coming out of Ohio State. What they used to run back in 2019, I'm blanking on who their DC was back then, but it was cover 3, cover 1. And he was in press coverage, basically like snap 1 to snap.
And he could run with guys.
And he could back then. And he had a massive wingspan, like
good hands.
6'6" wingspan. And so he was a guy that lived and thrived in that defense. And when he got asked to play other stuff at the NFL level, it didn't work out. So I do think what I've learned, especially cornerback evaluation, is man coverage is great. But you had 2 man cover corners that draft, him and CJ, who's the Jaguars corner, CJ. Blanking on his last name.
I am too.
Out of Florida, who were both like man
Henderson.
corners. CJ Henderson. There we go. Thank you. 2 man corners who could not play zone, did not have a feel for that to save their lives, and then also like couldn't tackle. And today in the NFL, cornerback is more of a tackling position than it's been any time in recent memory. So those guys have to be able to do that. So that's one thing I did learn from them. But also it's like, man, that guy's injury history really robbed him of his career.
This week being the first this is from Josh Dooley. This week being the first bye week, is it better to have an early or late bye? Does it make sense to stagger them, or could it work to have only 1 or 2 bye weeks?
Ooh.
So
it's almost a deep dive question.
Yeah, this is a deep dive question. I'll take the first part of it.
Okay, I got this.
Is it better to have an early or a late bye week? I would say you want a late bye week.
For sure.
I mean, now it all depends on where your team's at. Like if I'm Kansas City and I'm looking for answers from a health perspective, from my running back, from my receiver, there's a number of teams that could probably use a bye with their current health issues. But overall, if all things being even, you'd want it towards the end of the year. You want to be able to regain for that last push. And also, it's nice once that weather starts to get darker and colder and rainy. It's nice to have that week off. Maybe you get to go home for a few days, reset mentally. I think more than physically is the reset mentally.
For sure.
To be able to get out of the building, spend time with your family. If it falls around the holidays, great. You get really lucky if that's the case. Not everybody's that lucky, though.
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag. Like, to your point, Kansas City Chiefs could probably use a bye right now. I think the Eagles are getting their bye at a perfect time with all the injuries they have right now. But most guys in the NFL, and I say most guys I've talked to in locker rooms and across the NFL, you want it at the halfway point.
Yep.
Like week 8 or 9 is perfect for a bye, right? Week 12 is kind of pushing it because your body, you're going to be beat. And I think the Jets are around that, and it's tough because not only did they have 3 games in 11 days to start the season, they have another Thursday coming up. They have another Monday night. So they're getting shortened days here and there. So, like, you would have and then they go to London this week, and they're not actually taking their bye. Minnesota's taking it after the London trip, but the Jets aren't.
I'm sure they have a mini bye.
You want to have the Monday night, the following.
As they, coaches are like, we got a mini bye.
They have the Monday night after, so they technically gain the game that day on the way back. But you would love to have that right in the middle. But I also look at it this way. Sometimes it's not good having it too late, too, because what if your team's on a hot streak?
Yeah.
The one thing you don't want to do is take the pause in that. Because, like, we always know this. Like, momentum's a real thing. Some coaches won't admit it. They'll be like, you make your own momentum. Nah, momentum's a real thing. Like, if you're stringing together some wins,
an object in motion stays in motion.
Exactly.
Coach. It's physics.
Literally physics. The last thing you want to do is stop in the middle of like a 5 or 6 game win streak and be like, we got to take our bye, because now you got to reset. Now, again, you hope that you got a veteran enough team to get the young guys together where, all right, we're going to use this to reset our minds. And then you'll even see in those scenarios where the coach, instead of giving you the whole week off, we're practicing all the way to Thursday, and then we're going to give we'll give you those 3 or 4 days off, and then you come right back to it, because we have a bigger goal in mind than you taking a couple extra days off and being home. Now, the practices won't be crazy, but he just wants to keep you mentally engaged.
You want your guys to sweat.
Yeah.
You don't want your guys to strain. You want your guys to sweat a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Get a lift in.
The one thing you don't want to do is do nothing for a week and decay away.
And don't forget each other.
Yep.
It's nice to be around your teammates in a non-grindy setting. Like, you come in, you eat your pancakes, you go to the team meeting, you get a lift in. It kind of feels like the spring a little bit if you are one of those teams that sticks around during the bye.
What are your guys' thoughts on the second bye week? I always thought when they added that extra game that it made sense to give a second bye week. And I actually thought, like, instead of the extra game, a second bye week would still give more national primetime games that the NFL could sell. Yeah. And the players want the extra bye week. Would they not? Or was that something that
it makes the season another week longer?
I was going to say, it does make the season longer. I wonder how that would work in regards to like scheduling everything. I know there's been talks about it when it comes to potentially going to 18 games. I think that for the PA, I think that should be mandatory.
For the international games, they're going to throw this mandated bye week after an international game. Correct. I think that would be a smart way to do it if Roger wants to continue to make this thing more international. If we're doing Mexico City, if we're doing Europe, I'm not sure the furthest destination they want to go, but I think it would only make sense to add another bye week.
And to your point, I think they've already talked about it. Even if they add the extra game and that extra bye week, that the Super Bowl essentially would be around President's Day, so everybody could be off on that Monday.
Wow.
So, like, everybody can really enjoy the Super Bowl. So, I mean, they've already kind of tinkered and talked about it a little bit. I think if you go to 18, Mike, they need for sure 2 bye weeks. I just don't know if they're going to give them another bye week with 17 games. I think it's interesting because colleges have 2 bye weeks now, right? Mm-hmm. And exactly what we talked about. We just saw Colorado versus UCF. UCF was playing at a high level, take the bye, get boat race at home by Colorado. Like, you worry about that. That's a real thing, worry about guys being really re-engaged, because a lot of teams coming off the bye tend to start games off slow. Like, that's the worst that can happen when you're on a win streak. So I think that's the thing that you have to juggle as a coach, trying to figure out how we're going to plan this. If we do have 2 bye weeks, maybe the first one I give them the whole week off. The second one, you're only going to get like 3 or 4 days off instead of the whole week.
And it all comes down to how you're playing and what your team's doing at the time.
All right, next question here comes from Doubly. Need to know more about Eric All and if he's as much of a dog as I think he is. Eric All, tight end for the Cincinnati Bengals, rookie out of Iowa via Michigan. So just like he was pick 116, 4th rounder. He's old. He's 24. Why he fell that far, his injury history is pretty extensive. Had spinal surgery 2022, ACL surgery last November. That's why he falls that far. But this guy's a plus athlete. I mean, he's a big, fluid dude, great after the catch, good, probably plus separator at tight end position. But obviously, injury history is why he falls. I will also say, though, the one thing I worry about with him and his tape, inconsistent hands. I think his drop rate in college was like 13% over the course of his career. So, but for the Cincinnati Bengals and what they had at the tight end position previously, I think he could be that guy in time for them. All right, next question. Most impressive rookie who have been the most impressive rookie OTs and OGs, and who have been the biggest surprises, good or bad, amongst the group? This comes from Flack.
I'll go first, Kyle. I'll let you go. I think Fuaga from the Saints played really well, especially against the run game. I think J.C. Latham in the run game has been a hoss, but we kind of knew that coming into
He's looked a lot better the past 2 weeks.
Correct,
than the first 2
for
weeks.
sure. And this is what we talked about with development. And, you know, it's kind of the more you play, the more you're going to get comfortable, the more confidence you're going to build. A guy that some people are talking about, but not enough, and I had a lot of question marks. You can tell me what you thought about him coming out in the draft. Dominique Pooney. He's played really well. Yeah. And I was surprised because when you look at Lance Leopold in their offense, it's a gimmick offense. So when he was at Kansas watching his tape, I'm like, I don't know how this translates to the NFL because they had him playing left tackle, but then they had so many wide splits and they would do so many freaky formations. I'm like, I don't know how he's going to make the transition.
What was real and what wasn't.
I didn't know how that transition was going to occur in the NFL. I think having Chris Forster, the offensive line in San Fran, has helped him a lot. That's why we always talk about Kyle. Coaching matters.
Especially in the line.
He's played really well. He's kind of solidified what that offensive line has looked like in San Fran because I know a lot of people will say, besides Trent Williams, everybody else on the offensive line are kind of just guys, right? But I think he's actually solidified that offensive line as a rookie, which is rare to do.
I had Puny 34th on my board coming out. So I was probably higher on him than anyone else. I thought his tape, especially.
And we've liked him since the beginning. And the thing that stuck out to me about Puny early was his eyes. His eyes are always in the right spot. He can make every block. He can protect for you. He can reach a front side 3 technique. He can cut off a backside shade.
For sure.
There isn't much he can't do. He's great in conjunction with other players and double teams. It's a lot of fun to watch him. But the most impressive thing for me about Puny has been his eyes. The center that I've liked is Cooper Beebe. I've kind of had my eyes on him since the beginning. He had some struggles early in the season, but I really like his pad level. I like his finish and the ability for him to stay latched on to second level defenders. That's what makes him a good player. Guyton, I was high on because I wanted the Cowboys to have another step. He oversets. Yeah. And I think that the issue with a lot of these young tackles is underselling their own athleticism and overselling the athleticism of the rushers.
Say that one more time. Well, I like that. That
as an offensive lineman, you have to have just as much confidence or more than a defensive lineman, because in terms of length, size, and speed, these defensive linemen, they've got it over you. Yeah. You know, like they can get to the spot whether you want it or not. So in my opinion, you have to be able to have that confidence to stay inside out and have trust in your technique and your coaching that they're not going to just put you out in an ocean that's going to sweep you away. We're giving you tools to go win these reps. And for Tyler Guyton, I think it's trusting the tools, not oversetting and staying inside out. And it's not just Guyton. It's a lot of guys throughout the NFL right now. I liked what you said about Fuaga, dominant in the run game, which helps things so much for him. If run looks like pass looks like run, it's a really tough guy to play against as a defensive lineman. I think the real interesting thing is watching the first to second year guys. Like I got my eyes on Darnell Wright a lot in Chicago, who was a top pick there last year. And, you know, I just need to continue to see progression. I need to see more plans with their hands. I think it's telling with the offensive line coach what offensive linemen are doing with their hands at the point of attack. Are they catching? Or are they delivering first significant touch? If you're delivering first significant touch, you can usually live to tell the story. But if you're catching, which a lot of these tackles are doing now, you're going to end up in your quarterback's lap and you're going to be on the sideline.
A few other notables I want to touch on. I think Jackson Powers Johnson has looked impressive the past 2 weeks. For sure. And he was a center in college, but he's asked to play right guard and left guard. So 2 positions he has never played before. I thought he's been impressive. Obviously, Joe Alt, we didn't mention him. Probably the best rookie offensive tackle in the NFL. Roger Rosengarten this past week against the Bills played outstanding.
Beast. I loved him coming out of Washington.
He's fantastic. I will say Olu, we haven't touched on him. He didn't look great at right tackle, but he had to flip sides from left to right. And
he'll get better.
He'll get better. But the best rookie offensive lineman, in my opinion, Zach Frazier. I know they said OTs and OGs, but that center for the Pittsburgh Steelers looks like he could be a Pro Bowler year 1. All right.
That's wild.
We got one more question from the chat here. Will this trend of QB busts making a comeback with their second/third teams continue moving forward? And then he wants to know Zach Wilson going to be a stud in 2025.
So many of these guys that are QB busts, in your opinion, get into situations that are in dire straits. And I think the overreaction of the coaching carousel, the hiring cycle, puts these guys behind the 8 ball in terms of the staff that they are inherited by, the talent pool around them, the game plan, the scheme, the confidence. There is no confidence in these buildings. You get these number 1 picks, these number 2 picks. And yes, there are misses and there are the reaches. I was there when Trubisky got drafted over Mahomes and Trubisky got drafted over Deshaun Watson. Doesn't mean he's a bad player. It just means Patrick Mahomes is a little bit better at football. And also the situation.
I love that you putting in for your guy Mitch.
But, I feel bad because he wasn't like.
It wasn't his fault.
No, he got drafted. Somebody else didn't pick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson as well.
This is why coaching matters too, though, because he went to Andy Reid.
Coaching matters, dude. Like, you get to these situations, and Patrick, who fell to the Chiefs and was behind Alex Smith and not asked to play immediately, that's great. I mean, and then you see guys like Darnold who have been through football hell emotionally, physically, and in the media. You get an opportunity with a guy like Kevin O'Connell and that roster. It's no surprise that these guys are having success. And I mean, I'm happy for backups. They get to rewrite their story. Geno Smith, Sam Darnold, all these guys.
Baker Mayfield. Like, again, this is what we were talking about earlier. Like, people are so quick to label somebody a bust, but where you go to, where you fall in the draft, what scenario you in, like, are you in a situation that's built for you to have success, for you to develop? Like, again, we look at Zach Wilson. He went number 2 overall to my Jets. And, some of it was on him, but some of it was on his surrounding pieces as well. Like, the kid was getting beat up there, just like Sam Darnold was.
I still look at him and think he could go for
I would not be surprised if Zach Wilson 2 or 3 years from now has a similar Sam Darnold, Geno Smith story. He gets into the right scenario where he's competing with another guy to be the starter, and he outplays them and becomes a starter. Would not surprise me at all, because from a skill standpoint and the arm that this kid has, it's there. Right. And people were saying when he got traded to Denver, like, he kind of fell in love with football again. He was just happy again. And, when you're in
Sean
the media,
Payton raised him up.
Yeah. Well, I tell people all the time, like, I played in the New York media most of my career. It's not for everybody.
Nope.
Like, it's not for the faint of heart. You have to not only be strong physically, but mentally, more than anything, you have to be smart. Because, like, everything you do is under a microscope, and it's going to be 10 times bigger in New York. So, like, to Kyle's point, where you go matters. Like, people are so quick to label somebody a bust, but where
it's
you
such
go,
a bad word. It's such a lazy word without context and without.
The pick was a bust. The player was always the player.
Yeah.
The player is who he is.
Deep.
That is. And to your point, right? Usually when you're going 1, 2, 3, it's because the team isn't good. You're going to.
Yes.
Right. So, like, this is why I think Adam Peters' home run job, Dan Quinn, and flipping that roster over, like, in regards to getting on a guy like Nick Allegretti, who has championship experience, Tyler Biadasz from the Dallas Cowboys. Now you make them weaker and you make yourself stronger within the division, right? When you get a guy like Jaden Daniels, who already has a true number 1 in Terry McLaurin, you bring in a veteran guy like Zach Ertz, he can really lean on the run game. You go get Austin Eckler, who is beat up right now, but he's a safety valve you can go to when everything else down the field is covered. And then on the defensive side, like, they literally overturned the whole defense, and we know that's Dan Quinn's specialty. So, like, people have been talking about Jaden Daniels, and rightfully so. Again, he's not only in Offensive Rookie of the Year category, he's in MVP category right now.
Wow.
But, I mean, it's crazy. If he keeps playing like this,
I'm just saying, wow, like, it's wild.
Yeah, but, like,
it's not wrong.
This Commanders defense has played significantly better the last 2 weeks. Now, they struggled versus the Bengals, which everybody has. The Bengals just can't stop anybody on defense. That's why they keep losing games. But the Arizona Cardinals team to play against, it's not an easy offense to slow down. And the Commanders did a really good job last week.
I'll say this about, people treat these number 1, number 2 overall picks as saviors, but, like, if your team drafted number 1 over 2 overall, your organization has failed at some point.
Correct.
Right? Like, you have organizational failings, and then you put that on this new quarterback and say he's going to turn us around instead of, like, looking internally. And now the Commanders did a great job of this, obviously, when you had a new owner, and that's part of the reason why things have turned over so fast there. But, like, they don't look in the mirror and say, where do we need to change as an organization to build around this guy? So I think that hurts a lot of these QBs. I will say Zach Wilson, whatever. I think there's another bigger conversation there that's developing these quarterbacks, like, in time. I think it's not a coincidence that Jaden Daniels looks the best as a rookie when he played 5 years of college.
Correct.
He got to develop
Experience,
at the correct pace, going from Arizona State, then to the SEC, where it's like the best competition in America. And like from each step he had the perfect amount of challenge to him given at each point in time. Whereas Zach Wilson went from the easiest situation I've ever seen at BYU behind this God tier offensive line, never under pressure, to a terrible offensive line where literally he was under pressure every single snap. So it's like, you were not developing at the pace he needed to develop at. It wasn't the incremental step. It was like going from high school to the NBA back in the day, and why so many of those guys failed, besides the true, the LeBron James.
I'm just thinking about how big his offensive line was in college.
At BYU compared to everybody else.
He did say they were a God tier offense. They were a God centered offensive line, I would say.
That also. But it was them playing, and it was the COVID year, so he was only playing other non-Power 5 schools.
Correct.
He was only playing all these small schools and just beating them up, and it's like, just that leap in competition, to expect him his rookie year to come in and start week one.
Yeah, he shouldn't have played.
It was like, what are we doing here? Like that was just too much on his plate too quickly, and he just floundered. Yeah,
to your point, Mike, I think, again, when a team is picking first or second, you made a great point. Like, you failed,
a few times.
A few times to be picking this high. And I think what teams have to realize is, this guy isn't there to uplift the team. You guys need to uplift him.
Yes.
Right? You have to put him in a scenario. Like, this is why a lot of people thought that with Caleb Williams, this was the best scenario a number one pick has ever been in, because essentially they weren't the worst team in the NFL. They would have been picking 8, right? Because of the trade the year before. They were picking Carolinas, but
it ain't great.
It ain't great, but they also made some good moves in the offseason to make sure that he was solidified. I think a lot of people thought the offensive line would be better than it was, but as far as having the weapons, and I thought Caleb had his best game Sunday in regards to playing from within the pocket. Now, he didn't have gaudy numbers, but as far as the development part that we were talking about, he
check downs, taking care of the football. That's the stuff that Caleb
of course,
did.
people will question, like, should they have taken Jaden Daniels? And that conversation is going to continue to happen.
I will not entertain that conversation.
I mean, Jaden Daniels, if you would have put him in, so his first year at LSU was his 4th year in college. If you would have put, this is Caleb Williams' 4th year since high school, right? If you would have put Jaden Daniels in an NFL offense, his 4th year out, he would have looked horrible, flat out. Like, he wasn't even that great at LSU. So I do think that's also, like, he made a big leap up from what he had to do at USC to now what he's doing in the NFL. He can have the 2 or so years to develop that Jaden Daniels got. And it's just, these people, like, we expect.
Take a beat, everybody. Breathe.
We expect the most just because he was billed as that, but he's billed as that because what he did as a freshman, sophomore, junior was better than what anyone else was doing as freshman, sophomore, junior. Like, Justin Herbert came in the NFL awesome. He played for 4 years in college. Like, there's a lot of these guys who come in. Baker Mayfield was awesome as a rookie, 5 years in college. It's like, you have to get the reps and develop against where you're supposed to be developing.
Burrow experience.
Exactly. So I do think that's a big portion of it, that we just don't give some guys grace.
Thank you, Ezra.
Them all to be CJ Stroud.
CJ Stroud is the caveat. Like, people have to stop leaning into that. Like, he's the anomaly.
But then that's
like,
why you think CJ Stroud's like an MVP candidate, should be like among the top 3 in the NFL at some point in his career, because that's different. That's not what guys do.
He's not what most guys do, right? He's not the track record.
All right. Great conversation there. As always on Wednesdays. We'll be back tomorrow previewing every single game of the weekend. And like I said, if you want your question answered, 5-star review on Apple Podcast, and you will for sure get it answered. Until next time, keep pushing.